Okay, I guess we're ready to get started. Thanks everybody for coming. Some people came a long way, so we really appreciate everyone who managed to come.
Yes.
And we're really sorry that Penny and her family couldn't come, but
Yeah.
Newfoundland is a long ways
It
away
is.
and it's very expensive, so.
Right. She's here in spirit.
Yes, yeah. I think maybe everyone knows there's some photos. There's a nice poster that Bill made on the table there, and inside there's some pictures that Laura brought. I'd like to thank Jerry and Lil for hosting us. They've been very generous at letting us all get together here.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank everyone for bringing food because I'm sure we'll all enjoy it later. And there is a guest book that's inside right now, but we'll get it set up after we finish this. So the first thing I'm going to do, I guess, is read the obituary, and then I'm going to talk about some of my memories of Betty, and then we'll see if whoever else would like to contribute to that. So in memory of Elizabeth Ann Kowach. It is with great sadness that we announce Betty's passing at the age of 71. Betty is survived by her daughters Penny Chant and her husband Bill and their children Dylan, Jonathan, and Shelby, and by Karen Kowach and her partner Rick Johnson and grandchildren Ethan Kowach, Darian Johnson, and Haley Nash, and her siblings Bill, Ellen, that's me, and my husband Jim Johnson, Ken, and Sandra, Dawn, Laura, Susan Morgenstern, Jerry and Lil, Lorna and Dale Brackenbury, Sandra, Linda and Jerry Gardner, John and his wife Oksana Sadchenko, sisters-in-law Phyllis Urchuk, Kathleen Kowach, Gail Moulding and brother-in-law Dale Kowach, former in-laws Susan Patterson, Bruce Klepfer, and Brian Morgenstein, and many nieces and nephews, relatives, and friends. Betty was born in the Stettler Hospital February 6, 1949, the second child and first daughter of Francis and Marion Thurston. She grew up in a family of 12 children on a family farm southwest of Donalda. She attended grades 1 to 11 in Donalda and grade 12 in Stettler. After high school, she attended Olds College and then took nurse's aide training in Calgary. After graduating as a nurse's aide, she moved to Edmonton and worked at the Royal Alexandra Hospital in 1969 and 70. She met Reginald Kowach, and they were married in July 16, 1971, and moved briefly to Fort Smith. In 1973, after returning to Edmonton, their first daughter Penny was born, followed by Karen in 1975. They moved to Stettler for a few years when the girls were little, and later moved to Red Deer, where Betty worked in a long-term care facility for quite a few years. She retired from nursing care in the early 90s, and then did janitorial work at the GST building in Red Deer until health issues forced her to retire. Betty was a hard worker with high standards and liked to keep busy, so being forced to retire was very frustrating for her. In 2007, Betty and Reg moved to Gander to be closer to their daughter Penny and family. In 2015, they moved back to Red Deer and resided there, where Reg passed away in November of 2018. Due to failing health, Betty moved into Missioner Extended Care in early April this year. That would be last year, 2020 actually, I think, where she lived until entering hospital about a week before she passed away. Family was everything to Betty. She enjoyed spending time with her girls, and especially the grandchildren, and you'll see lots of pictures of that. Except for the few years that Betty and Reg spent in Gander, it was difficult for them to be so far away from Penny and her family. Betty enjoyed getting together with her siblings and their families, and attended many of the Lee family reunions, and the Thurston get-togethers, and special holidays as she could. Betty and the girls spent many summers camping at Buffalo Lake at Boss Hill Campground and Roshan Sands Provincial Park. Betty was a voracious reader and particularly enjoyed reading murder mysteries. She was a very friendly person and enjoyed talking to people wherever she went. Betty is predeceased by her husband Reg, her parents Marion and Francis Lee, her parents-in-law Anne Marie and John Kowach, her brothers-in-law James Mailer, James Kowach, Ken Kowach, Daniel Kowach, Gary Kowach, and sister-in-law Brenda Kowach. Betty will be remembered as a loving mother, wife, grandmother, sister, and friend. She will be dearly missed by all who knew her. And of course, as everyone knows, due to COVID restrictions and a desire to keep everyone healthy, we held off doing a celebration of her life until today. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share some of my memories of Betty, and then I'll ask other people, whoever would like to say something, to share some memories from them. My first memory of Betty is when our mother was trying to teach us how to share. And I specifically remember, I think we must have made homemade donuts, or she had made homemade donuts. And I must have been instructed because I kept saying to myself, give Betty a piece of the dough. Give Betty a piece of the dough. I'd been told to share with Betty. And the second thing I remember is that something that Betty taught me, I was quite small, I think probably, and she told me that when you eat, you're supposed to keep your mouth closed. And I thought, how can you eat with your mouth closed? How can I move my teeth up and down and chew with my mouth closed? I did discover that she was right. And then there's bubble gum. I don't know if any of you remember the song. How does it go? Something about leaving your bubble gum on the bedpost overnight. Yeah, and anyway, we forgot to do that one time, and we had to have the gum cut out of our hair the next morning, I remember. Both of us.
Was impressed with that.
Yeah, I bet she was.
Yeah.
Did you learn from the lesson though?
Probably.
You hope.
Yeah. I remember we both had the German measles at the same time, and I think that's the one where it could affect your eyes, because I remember being shut in a dark room with the curtains all closed and everything with Betty for several days while we had the measles.
Oh.
And later on, when we were a little older, we slept in the back bedroom, which was kind of like a shed attached to the old house. And there wasn't a lot of heat out there, and I remember in the winter, we would take, Betty and I shared a bed in one end of the room, and we would take a quart sealer of hot water and keep it on our feet keep our feet warm, and then when we would set it out on the floor overnight. And I remember one morning it was frozen and the jar was broken when we woke up. And this is a very fond memory, when to keep warm in the bed, we would always lie back to back to keep each other warm. And when we got dressed in the morning, we would bring our clothes in under the covers to put them on before we came out.
Thing to do.
Another thing I remember doing with Betty is we used to go and visit Grandma and Grandpa Thurston, and visit Uncle Perry and Aunt Burl and Velma and Karen and Jim. And one particular thing I remember doing there, which I'm sure Velma and Karen will remember, is that we loved their house. It had all these nice verandas, and we decided that it would be clever one day to decorate one of the verandas with crayons. And we drew all over around the outside, and Aunt Burl wasn't too impressed when she discovered it, and I think we had to clean it up, as I remember correctly. Yeah. And we shared a room, Betty and I, for quite a long, till we were in probably our mid-teens. And I remember that neighbors who had girls older than us used to give us boxes of clothes. And I remember Betty and I in the bedroom going through these boxes, trying all these neat things on to see who would get what and what would fit who. And that was really fun. I remember we compared our likes in terms of cars and singers. And Betty liked Cadillacs and I liked a Mercedes. And Betty liked Elvis, and I liked the Beatles. And the one thing we always shared in common is we both really liked to read mysteries. Another thing we did is we teased our mom. I distinctly remember one time, one of us going like that and then I said, "Ouch, Betty, don't!" And she came running to see what we were fighting about. And we laughed.
That would be drama for sure.
Yeah. When Betty went to Olds College, I remember I would have been in grade 12 that year, and she invited me down for a weekend because there was some kind of a dance, and I stayed with her in the dorm, and I have fond memories of that. When she lived in Edmonton, and I think I was in Red Deer for the summer, I remember going up, and we Betty was away for some reason, and my friend and I stayed in her apartment. I think maybe that was the first time I got drunk, but I won't give you the details on that. Basically, at some point around 1970, just before they got married, I missed their wedding because I was out working in southern Manitoba, and then I moved away, moved to Ottawa, and we didn't see a lot of each other after that. And then, later on when Betty's hearing wasn't very good, I couldn't phone her either, so it was a bit frustrating not to be able to be in touch with her. Yeah. But I think one of the things that we've discovered over the years, or at least I've discovered, is that in a large family, and maybe in any family, every child kind of grows up in a different family because everybody has different memories and different connections. Like I've heard people talk about memories of Betty that I don't remember, that other people. So I think at this point I'd like to see, Bill, you had some things that you'd like to say, and I'll just stand aside and then I'm going to stand in the shade while you're doing that.
Yeah, get the shade.
Yeah, the sun is just unbelievable.
We can squeeze you guys in if you'd rather sit in the shade. Some of
That
you.
actually would be nice if somebody
do it.
can
Maybe this bench could even be
maybe
moved
move
back.
back.
Yeah.
This one.
Something, because we're all dying up here.
Yeah, and understandable.
A little bit. How's it going?
We could move this one back a little bit. Take my shoes with me, I guess.
Don't need to cook.
Oh, that's way better.
I know, right?
Thank you guys. You're gonna be
Oh my God, sit
Beside me, you're
It's all about you.
Okay.
Don't go back.
Just a tad more.
Oh.
Still gonna have enough room? Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Bill.
So I have just a couple of little things to brief little memories to share. The first one, I think I remember Dad telling this story. Betty would have been about 6 months and I would have been about 2 years. On a nice summer day, Mum put Betty out in the backyard in her bassinet. Later, I tried to climb up on the side of the bassinet for a better look at Betty. My weight tipped everything over on the top of me, and Betty and I rolled out on the ground. When Penny was about to be born, I drove Betty and Reg to the Royal Alec Hospital.
I didn't know that.
A few years ago, when Linda and Jerry hosted one of their many family events at their Oaks acreage, Betty and Reg rode with me there and back. On the way back to Red Deer, with Reg snoozing in the back, Betty and I had the nicest chat, mostly about ourselves and family things. It was a lovely one-on-one talk that I'll always remember. So if anyone else wants to share some memories.
I guess the memory I have is Betty and Reg. I was probably mid to late 70s, and I don't know who instigated it, but they decided Betty should learn how to drive.
Oh, shut up. Shut up.
And they came over on the day, and we were haying across the road, and I was bailing, and there was a big area cleared off, and so they had their car down there, and it was like bumper cars going down there. I finally had to stop bailing because I couldn't keep on the swath and watch them at the same time. So anyways, there was no fences hurt or no bales hurt or anything. So
I'm sure she screamed at him a lot.
A lot.
A lot. I could just imagine. That's
Ken, did you
hilarious.
have anything you wanted to say?
I think I should say something.
Just a little further. Oh, you go ahead, Ken.
You can go next.
I'll go after Ken.
Okay. I have a couple memories of Betty, and one of them was I had just, I believe, gotten a... Okay, I had just gotten a job in Edmonton, and it would have been 1970 probably about. And Betty had an apartment somewhere over by the university. And she invited me over for supper one night, and I still remember she did steaks in the oven in tin foil with onions and mushrooms and stuff, and it was just like it's kind of the memory you don't ever forget, right?
Right? Your older sister cooking for you like that?
Yeah.
That's awesome, lucky guy.
I remember another time talking about eating, and maybe that goes along with the program, but Betty at the farm here, I don't know, it was in the new house at that time, and I'd have probably been, I don't know, maybe 14 or something like that. Betty's cutting the roast for dinner on Sunday, right? So I go by and I grab a piece of beef, and her remark is, "That's for dinner, leave it," right? And I'm back again, and pretty soon, probably about the third time, she turned around with a butcher knife and stuck me in the arm, right? And it's like, you get the point, right? So, anyway, yeah, I miss her. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's truly my mother. Truly my mother.
About the decoration business.
Oh my God, I could
We
totally
used
hear her.
wax crayons to decorate, and Mom and Dad made us clean it up, and we cleaned it up. But every time the sun came out and shone on it, that wax came up through the paint, and it was there forever and ever. And we also, one other time, we made tunnels in the bale stacks. Do you remember?
Oh my
Oh,
God.
yeah.
The tunnels in the bale stacks. Well, I had claustrophobia. I couldn't go in because I was a guard outside. But Betty had found a mother cat and kittens, and she had them back in the tunnel. And so she was always going in, and she'd come out and she'd say, "Velma, those kittens are really cute. You should come and see them." And I'd say, "Bring them out to me." No, you have to. But I never could come in.
Donald, did you?
Yeah, I'll say a few words. So I'll start with current day and move backwards in time. But I was so glad that I was able to drive up to Red Deer. I think it was October of 2020, and include Betty in a family Zoom. It was a frustrating experience for her, but it was great for everyone to be able to see her at least on the phone. Prior to that, I guess my favorite memories were having coffee with her at Parkland Mall. She used to go there on a regular basis. And and she'd be there with friends or with Reg. Actually, the last time I had coffee with your dad, Karen, was Reg and Betty were there, and some of their other friends, but over the hour or so we had coffee. At one point in time, they switched places. Reg was sitting beside me, and he pulled out his wallet, and he pulled out their wedding picture. And he explained to me, Betty and Jean or someone were engrossed in conversation, and Reg explained it was the best thing that ever happened to him to meet Betty.
Shut the hell up. What?
So I took
That's what?
yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, it was
Well,
like
that's not my dad. That's normally not my dad.
I was surprised too.
Wow.
And I thought he's really having a down to earth moment.
Wow.
The other memories I remember of coffee were in Gander, Newfoundland. Actually, I met them at Tim Hortons, and we had coffee there. And then a couple of days later, with Penny and Bill and the kids, we went out for pizza together in Gander. But the memory going back to here was when we were kids, we built rafts on the glorious Pigpen Slough.
Oh, good God.
Actually, it was a lot more glorious back then. I think it's kind of shrunk over the years, like most of us.
A little bit.
So I don't know how many rafts we had at the peak, probably 3 or 4. And I don't really remember how we each had ownership of our rafts, but it was early in the season, maybe May or June. All the ice was gone, and we went down, and I pushed my raft out, and Betty came down, and there was one that she had as well. And because they'd been sitting in the water so long, they were pretty waterlogged. And we got out, 20 or 30 meters from shore, and you'd use a long rail to pole yourself and move around on the slough. But if she moved to one side, the raft would start to go under the water, and the water would come up on the boards, and then she'd rush over to the other side. Well, now it would go down. And after about 3 times, there was enough water on the deck that it got slippery, and she slipped and fell, and now she's standing on the bottom of the slough. And the water came right up to there. She wasn't too nonplussed by that, but she climbed back on the raft and carried on. Anyway, that's what I'd like to share today.
So I'm 10 years younger than Betty, so I don't remember much about her when I was a kid, but I think it was obviously the year Penny was born. I went and visited them. Reg was working at Spruce Grove on a farm, and I was 16, so I didn't have to go to church convention. All the rest of the kids did.
Lucky you.
I felt lucky. Anyways, I remember I'd never changed a baby's diaper, but Betty let me change Penny's, and I immediately poked her with a pin. And anyways, Betty never said anything, so I guess I was a bit more help than I thought I was. But I think the next night I stayed up late with Betty and Reg, and they were watching TV, and it was a horror movie with cats of all things. And I thought, I wished I hadn't watched it, because I thought, now I'm going home and we have a barn full of cats at the farm, right?
Lovely.
The other thing I remember fondly, and I wasn't there, but I heard this story and I thought it was pretty funny, was Betty and Reg camped, as you heard, at Boss Hill and Roshan Sands quite a bit, and I'm not sure which place this was, but they had a tent trailer, and Betty and the girls had gone to bed, or going to bed, and suddenly there's a whole lot of screaming going on, and turns out there was a great big bug inside the tent trailer, and they were screaming and freaking out, and
It was actually spiders.
was it spiders?
Oh, the tent was covered in fucking spiders. Like,
Oh.
unbelievably covered. And every time that we moved from, like, Penny would turn on the light, and all of a sudden spiders would just go everywhere. And we were like, oh my God, like, we have to sleep in this? So we went to Mom and said, can we go to Grandma's? And she's like, no, because it was like, I don't know, by that 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And she's like, no, go back to bed. So we're like, but there's spiders. And she's like, go live with them. And it was like, but we don't want to. So we went back, and we literally, like, Penny and I, every time we seen a spider, we were like, get it. But then when we couldn't find it, we were like, oh no, it's in the blankets now.
Anyways, this one was not a spider, but it turned out it was a fly on the lens of the flashlight that looked huge.
That was in Calgary.
And that was all it was a fly that they freaked out about. And I do remember us missing them when they moved to Gander, and then meeting them at the airport when they came back. And so happy to have them back, and just enjoying time with them at Linda and Jerry's, lots of times at Thanksgiving, and Jerry and Lil's on Boxing Day. And I know they really enjoyed seeing everyone at those times too. That's all.
Well, one thing that I want to get your photos up there.
You didn't stand there long enough.
One thing that I've always remembered, when we were quite little, the 4 little kids, you won't be surprised to hear that our older siblings weren't necessarily very generous towards us. But Betty was away working, and she came home with these shake-a-puddings for the 4 little kids and helped us make them, and it was just so sweet, so nice. And another memory I have of her, I was quite a bit younger, and I had a sore on my hand. And she asked me if it hurt. And I said, yes, here, see how it hurts? Touch it. And she explained to me that she wouldn't feel the pain if she touched my sore. And,
That's cute.
but another thing that I will always remember, the last many years of our family gatherings, she just gave the best hugs, and just really, really strong hugs that were so heartfelt, and it was just a lovely, lovely thing.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Do you want to say anything? I'll go. I'm going to bring my
I don't really remember a lot of things about Betty when I was a little kid and stuff, but more so when we became adults and that. I do remember staying with them when I first moved to Edmonton when I was 18 to look for a job, and Penny was just a couple months old. And even then, Betty was a good cook, I remember. And I know they didn't have a lot, but the food was always good when I was there, that's for sure.
That's one thing I miss so much.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing that I do remember is that I used to phone her every few months. And oftentimes, we didn't necessarily have a lot in common, but somehow we really enjoyed these phone calls, and sometimes they were just bitch sessions, but you know, it was really nice, and I really missed that when she couldn't hear on the phone anymore. So now there was something else I was gonna, oh, I know what I was gonna say. She would probably give a lot of you trouble today, like she did when at Mom's funeral. She was really incensed that some of us weren't wearing pantyhose.
Oh, good God. Oh, good God.
We should have been wearing pantyhose, you know, because it was a special occasion and it would have. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. But
Nothing to do with varicose veins.
no, or chronic venous insufficiency. So I am wearing some today, but it's not because I want to. But yeah, exactly. Sorry.
Don't be sorry.
I'm just really grateful that she doesn't have to suffer anymore. Because she hated being old, well, and having all the problems that she had, and it was one thing on top of another. So I'm happy for that, but I miss her.
Is there anyone else that, pardon me? Karen, would you like to say anything?
Sure.
I appreciate that everyone came. She would love that seeing everyone. I'm just happy that everybody made it for the day. It turned out beautiful. She would have even laughed if it had rained. She would have been like, of course, that would be the way it is, right? As most of you have said, for when she lost her hearing, that was really hard, because she was living in Newfoundland when it happened, and I was used to her coming and calling me, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 times a week, or 2 or 3 times a day if she had to, or whatever. So when it happened that I couldn't talk to her, it was hard. And then when she moved back, it was better, but then of course her hearing still wasn't well. So I was happy to have them home, because then I got to see them, grow older and be with them. Yeah. Yeah, I miss both of them really immensely, and I do wish they were both here, but I know they're in a better place, and they're doing better, right? So that's all that matters. So, and I'm grateful that I got to be their daughter, because I got to experience them. So
yeah, we moved back to Red Deer to help them out because we were living out at Clive at the time, and I was having to run in and fix the remote because they couldn't they pushed the wrong button on the remote.
All
so
the
I'd have to
time.
run from Clyde to go to Red Deer to push one button on the remote so they could use the TV again.
Yeah.
And so we just decided it was probably easier since we were running back and forth anyways every other day, so just to move back to Red Deer. So we
Right?
moved back to Red Deer, and we got a big house in Red Deer that we all we got to
lived
spend
together.
some last few years with them, and
So that was good.
yeah.
Yeah.
I know we really enjoyed. We always go down to 3 Mile Bend, and we'd always get KFC and go there and have
Picnics and
by the river, and we enjoyed that. So yeah, we got a good last few years in with them, and
yeah.
it was appreciated.
Yeah, so
I
that's
think
the greatest part about it, I guess.
Yeah. And when we first met, I think it took a few years for them to warm up to me, but they always had their guard on, but I understand why. Protect beautiful daughters. I get it. But yeah,
All
I
right.
had a lot of respect for them and loved them very much.
Very much.
It's good.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Beth, did you want to say something? Can I stand here? Sure.
Yeah.
Sit there. So when the year that, this is going to really date me, the year that Laura was born, I was 16. So I went for the summer to help Aunt Marion. Yeah. And the one thing I remember about Betty is she loved those soaps on the radio. She would sit there with her ear against the radio listening to Pepper Young's Family or whatever. Things like that. Those are my biggest memories of her. But she told me at one of the family reunions, and I think it was at Roshan Sands, that she used to babysit you.
Oh, they babysit me all the time.
And one day you said to her, sometimes I just, when I'm mad, do this. Betty thought it was the funniest thing that had ever happened.
Well, but she also would stand at the window and she would finger him.
Yeah, we
Because she thought it
that.
was hilarious. And
Well,
he
she
would finger
told me
her
about
back.
it.
Yeah, and he'd finger her back because, of course,
It was a
you
funny thing.
tit for tat, right?
I can do it.
Yeah, exactly, right?
And I think you weren't very old, maybe about 3.
Yeah, oh yeah. Mom always did that all the time. That's so funny.
That reminds me of one more thing. I would have been in grade 10 or 11, and Betty and Reg and the girls were living in Stettler, and I wanted to go to a particular party with my boyfriend, and I wasn't allowed. So I asked Betty if I couldn't babysit for her, and she knew I wanted to go to a party. The next day, we had some kind of family thing, and I had stayed overnight at Betty and Reg's. And someone said, "Oh, Sandra, you're already here in Stettler." And Betty said, "She stayed overnight. She was babysitting." The folks didn't bat an eye. Nobody had any clue. Illusions. No, any illusions about what you were doing.
Betty had a very good sense of humor and loved to laugh. She had the best laugh.
Yes.
You know, that was always wonderful. And she could call a spade in no uncertain terms. But at the same time, there were other times when I thought she would say something and she'd bite her tongue and she would just keep it cool.
Surprisingly so.
Yeah. We were talking about the Pigpen Slough here.
Yeah.
And I remember at one of the reunions, and I was sitting beside Betty and Reg, and I was sitting beside, and the kids were all playing over in around the barn by the Pigpen Slough, and all of a sudden a whole bunch of the kids came running, and they said, "Gotta go help Nicholas, he's stuck in the shit." he had fallen off the railing or whatever, and he was stuck right down, and Betty just roared. She just thought that was...
I remember that.
That reminds me of a story, and Betty wasn't in on this one about Penny and Karen. We had a rooster that chased, and the girls were really little, and for some reason they were in the corral, and they saw that rooster coming. They were so scared they ran right out of their boots into the mud, and their boots were still stuck there, but they were gone.
Should we maybe move the discussion over to the, I think we're kind of finished with the formal and we can just chat. Thank you, everyone.
Nicely done.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, too.
Yes, thank you very much, Ellen.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.